Good. Oh, did you hear that? Ooh, we're live. Great. Oh, we got more people subscribed. Great. Oh, there we are. Live video. I can see it. Good. So, yeah, I've got we're definitely live. And so,
Good.
Well, we've got a minute. We'll wait for people to just log in, but
your picture quality for me has just deteriorated, but maybe that's okay.
it'll come up. It will come and go.
Okay.
I think this is part of the fun of dealing with these things.
Yes.
So, Ken, this is our first attempt at this, and it's called Courageous Conversations because my experience has been that often in religious circles, we're not the best at asking hard questions, or we sometimes shy away from difficult questions, questions that make us squirm, or the opposite is true, is that we find easy answers for complicated questions.
Or sometimes we don't let people ask questions or say anything, Justin.
Yeah.
We're good at one-way conversations.
Yeah. It's because we like the sound of our own voice, and or at least I do. Until I hear it played back, your voice always sounds different when you play it back.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Yeah, well, yours in particular.
So, yeah. So I thought tonight we could discuss. Well, all of these series is going to be about how faith and life sort of intertwine. I think that my experience of my own faith and my own life is that faith has been almost a tapestry, like it's woven into the fabric of my life, and it's given me meaning and understanding. I'm not the best theologian under the planet, but I think I speak from a lot of life experience, and I'm sure you speak from tons of life experience as well.
Slightly more.
Maybe a bit more. Yeah. So I think that sort of colors the way we see it. Now, I know that this is going to appeal to some people, and to other people, it's not going to be, it's not going to be their cup of tea, and that's fine. But this is for people who are seeking and have questions, and maybe we could be helpful on the journey. So, Ken, let's start with an easy one. We're doing this on Skype, or not Skype, okay. Another type of platform, but because we're in lockdown. So what has your experience been of being a minister? Or a minister is such a loaded term, but someone who lives their vocation in serving people. How have you found COVID-19 has impacted you and the church?
Yeah, well, profoundly, Justin. I mean, to me, you talked about the intersection of life and faith. I'm not even sure there's even such a distinction. I mean, to me, it's all the one. And I think we are creatures that have an awareness of something bigger than ourselves, and we're looking for answers we can't always find. So the faith and life seem to me to just be all one and the same thing. But relationships, to me, it's all about relationships. Over the years, I think I probably was brought up to believe that Christianity was about belief. It's what there's a statement of faith, it's a creed, it's a theology, it's a doctrine, all those kind of words that are about cerebral things and putting things in paragraphs, words that line up to make some kind of sense. I think increasingly I felt that it's much less about that. It's much more about who you are and how you live and the difference you make to others, and the values that you seek to live by. I don't mean that there aren't doctrines and beliefs. They are important, but I don't believe they're central, or even that's the priority. And when you take away the relationship and the potential for human relationship, what then is faith? If you can't relate to people. So, I mean, this kind of exercise is obviously Plan B. It's far better than nothing, and it's a huge boon and benefit. But it still isn't quite, it's not the full thing, is it? It's so I find it very frustrating, as you must. And I mean, we're both familiar with grief and with loss and with people going through terrible times, and that basic human connectedness of physical contact is so important, and we maybe didn't realize how important. So very frustrating would be my answer.
Yeah, I think for me, my bread and butter, the thing that makes me come alive, is not meetings. Funny enough, sitting through a meeting is not what gives me life, or doing tons of admin or sitting behind my computer screen. I think what gives me life is that face to face and being by people's most vulnerable moments. That's what I love about the job more than anything is that you get to go into the place where people are at their most vulnerable, whether it's they're in their hospital bed dying, and you get to speak to them in a conversation that is almost sacred. You know, it's almost you touching on the sacredness of things, or you go into someone's house after they've experienced a loss or death, or it, even in some ways, someone who's gone through the tragedy of a divorce or something, and you go and sit next to them, yeah, and you just sit and listen to their pain, and that for me is my bread and butter. That's where I want to be. That's where I'm called to be. That in the midst of the turmoil, and so I'm struggling with just not being able to be with people in their most vulnerable moments.
I think there is a little bit of a sense of being partially disempowered,
Yeah,
because our own experience, our own life experience, our own personality is part of what our ministry is. It has to be, and I've always been quite open with people that I've provided some strength or assistance to say, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for letting me help you. I need to be needed. It's nice to do that. I think
yeah,
lots of people have a satisfaction and a need to help others. And when that's taken away, it diminishes you,
yeah,
because I think it diminishes everybody.
yeah.
So that makes it more difficult.
Mm.
You were talking about the traumas and the difficult times, and I think that echoes with us as individuals, because we always will have some kind of reverberation with people who are going through something that we have been through before ourselves. And there's bound to be that sense of connectedness between people.
Yeah,
But the other side of it, of course, is the happy stuff.
yeah,
Sharing celebrations and the joy of in ministry. Okay, fewer people now come to us ministers to get married. I mean, I've seen a huge drop off in that in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, actually quite dramatic in the space of like 18 months. Suddenly going from 14 weddings in a year down to 2. And now it's at that level, 2 or 3 a year. And again, a few years ago, it was 20, 25 a year. So that used to be quite a big part of my job. And meeting couples who are in love, meeting couples to talk about their relationship, meeting couples talking about their own family and their upbringing. And, I loved all of that. I just thought, this is wonderful. I'm getting paid to be with people who are in love and to talk about their relationship. I just love that. So, sadly, that, as I say, has greatly diminished. But that was an enormous and satisfying part of ministry for me too at the time.
yeah. And it's those joys. I mean, this year we had 5 weddings lined up at our church, and I was just looking forward to celebrating.
Absolutely.
It's not all about the doom and gloom. It's about the moments that make your heart sing, and it's just, for me, baptism is a sacred moment where you bring a child and you say
Oh
that
yeah.
before you could do anything, God loved you. I think
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
a hugely affirming thing. And not being able to do that, we had baptism, including my own child.
Yeah.
That was lined up, and we had weddings where you say, like, out of, if you think about the statistics of people meeting, that you two found each other, and in somewhere in the midst of that, God showed love. I think it's a beautiful kind of thing, and missing that as well, definitely. So yeah, and so I think COVID-19 will go down as, for me, as a difficult time, not only pastorally, because dealing with deaths and dealing with funerals. I mean, we've both done funerals for people who've died of COVID, and it's difficult. It's difficult also dealing with funerals with people who haven't died from COVID, because you can only have 5 or 6 people in the creme at any time. And for me, my natural instinct is to embrace people. But at the other side of the COVID thing, and I say this because I know people have paid a high price for this perspective, is that we're starting to explore things in new ways. One of them is this conversation. One of this, we're starting to see things bubbling up underneath the surface that we might have missed, or if not missed, would have taken us 10, 15 years down the line to capture.
I think people also are incredibly adaptable, Justin. I mean, I was quite anxious for the first couple of funerals after lockdown because I thought, I'm just not going to be allowed to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I also felt, I'm not going to be able to do what they might expect of me.
Yeah.
So I felt I was going to be letting these people down because I wasn't going to be visiting. I wasn't going to be, giving that, and the physical attention, the presence, and holding any of that. But I soon discovered that actually people were remarkably resilient and accepting of the fact, oh no, that's okay. We know this is the way it has to be. And life-giving in that way. And I've had some wonderful telephone conversations with people I have never met.
Yeah.
But yet, with the right questions and, a genuine interest. I mean, I think you have to have, in ministry, I think if you're not interested in people and in people's stories, you're in the wrong job, aren't you? I mean, I put that one of my top priorities for ministry. As I was referring previously, I mean, higher than what you believe, I think, is probably more important.
Yeah.
And, you just have a real sense of getting to know people and wishing you had met certain individuals all through a telephone conversation, and it's just heartwarming.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And so you spoke a little bit about questions. And so I thought we could deal with a question that came in today. And part of the format is that people send questions to us. And this was a question, and it's all anonymous, that somebody sent in. And I think we'll break it up into a couple of pieces. I think we've spoken a little bit about the despair people are going in. So this is the question. It goes, since the world is going through this time of despair and great injustice, why do we not hear more of the end of life spoken about? The true spiritual message would be of great encouragement and comfort, especially at this time of excessive bereavement. So, there's a lot to go into that question, a lot of meat, and I think the person who sent this I know quite well, and we've spoken a little bit about this, and I think the difficulty is, for me, when we talk about death and life or the afterlife, is that we can be so, I forget who says the quote, but we can be so heavenly focused with no earthly good.
Yeah.
And I think, Jesus speaks about your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So there's this kind of idea of like heaven coming to earth. So for me, the question like that, I always answer in twofold. Is I start firstly by saying, what is happening in the world that you live? How do you bring life firstly into this community? So if for example, you're going through hardship and bereavement, what does life look like now? What does heaven look like now in this place? That's where my starting point about when I'm dealing with huge bereavement and huge loss. If someone's dying, what does a piece of heaven look like for that person?
I mean, would a way of putting that be, as I've heard it said, the issue is not life after death. The issue is life before death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as Christians, there is a tendency to think of earth as a waiting room, almost like
a departure lounge.
Yeah, and we need to sort of like sort out things this side in order to get to the better place that's that side. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily wrong, but I'm saying I just think there's more to it. There's more to life than ticking boxes about how do we satisfy God into getting into the next life?
Yeah, I mean, I have big reservations about that kind of theology, although it was something that I kind of grew up with.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm interested in the experience of people around the planet. I mean, I think there's plenty of countries where death, illness, bereavement has been at the door always. It's never been any different. And we're just very fortunate in the Western world, the more prosperous areas of the world, where we've kind of knocked that back a bit, and we've had a bit more security and a bit better medicine and more comfort and so forth. And as we all know, I mean, only a century ago, there were, national and international pandemics, epidemics of all kinds of diseases that took away hundreds of thousands of people. It was a regular feature of life. We were reminded of the reality of death, I think, in a way that now it seems like an invasion. It seems like an injustice. It seems like something we might be able to avoid. And the truth is we can't avoid it. So I think to me, an end of life issue is about recognizing our mortality rather than about recognizing or looking for immortality. There may be a hope. I am agnostic on whether there is any kind of afterlife. I don't believe it's integral to Christian, certainly not integral to my Christian faith. If it's there, that's wonderful. If it's not there, I'm okay with that. And I think it's, but working out what makes life worthwhile, and what would give you or me as an individual peace of mind if we knew we were coming into the final furlong. If we did know that things were about to close down and that would be the end. We don't want to be plagued with regrets. We don't want to have our conscience struggling with guilt about things in the past, unfulfilled potential and unresolved issues. I mean, to me, those are end of life issues. And I always say, a coffin doesn't have ears. If you want to say something to somebody, you've got to say it to their ears. You've got to say it when they can hear, when they can take in what you're saying. So tell them you love them. Tell them you're sorry. Tell them how much they meant to you. You've got to get those words in before death.
Yeah.
And I think to me that's an end of life issue, and not to be living with regrets, either for you as an individual when your time comes, or for somebody else knowing they've gone but you wish you'd done X, Y, or Z. Living with guilt and regret after somebody has died is a life sentence. It's no fun at all. So I don't kind of predicate my Christian faith around belief in an afterlife or getting into heaven in any kind of way.
Yeah, I remember growing up, and it was almost, if I look back at it now, it was a manipulation. If you hold on to these doctrines, people would often say to me, "Are you going to heaven?" And they never asked me, like, how do I treat the people I love? It was always kind of like, it was always very black and white. You're either going to heaven or you're not going to heaven. And if you say these magic words, then God all of a sudden will let you in. It's almost like a secret handshake.
Open sesame.
Yeah, and you say it. And in the last couple of years, I've really started to think about my own mortality, and this question really speaks to my own struggle a little bit. And for me, I worry how I end life. Firstly, I want to leave this world a better world than when I came. So that's the first thing. But the second part is, so if I get to the other side and there is nothing, how will I live? Now, how will I respond to that? Firstly, if I get to the other side and there is something and it's not what I expected, how will I live with that? And if I get to the other side and it's exactly as I expected, will I be disappointed? That is was my struggle, and where I sort of found myself. And I'll be honest, it rolled in my head for a long time. And it was a spiritual direction.
Do you often find yourself awake through the night? I mean, this this
Yeah,
this sounds like
it's not that I find myself awake in the night. I think in the midst of that is fear. In the midst of the afterlife for me is always a bit of fear. Like whether that was ingrained in me from when I was young and was told that if you don't say these like special words, God's not going to love you,
oh yeah.
or whether it was a fear of leaving the people I love behind. Like it's a really difficult thing. And just recently, my spiritual director was helping me, and we were talking about this because it's been quite a recent issue. Is that whatever God is, whatever form God takes, there's that story of Jesus talks about the wheat being separated from the chaff, and maybe the end of life, God, whatever that form takes in heaven, is a burning of the wheat and the chaff, and only goodness is left. And
Yeah, but if the chaff represents individuals, and you've got two categories of human beings or souls that are going off in different directions, to my mind, you've got a nonsensical theology. I mean,
yeah,
I think
for me, it's not about the wheat from the chaff in terms of individuals. It's about
right.
the inner self. I think there are parts of me that I know I'm not proud of. There are parts of me that cause destruction and leave turbulence in their wake, just as an aeroplane goes through air. There's sometimes that. And I think at the end of life, I hope that whatever that is will be consumed into goodness, and only what is good is left. And that's a difficult thing because fire is I'm talking quite up there at the moment in terms of metaphor and
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
I really hope that the end of life is filled with goodness. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that all the good that has been given and all the hope all that keeps going, it carries on for eternity.
I mean, there are people who will come to the end of their lives, and the whole thing is a painful and distressing experience for the individual and for everybody who loves them and people close to them. There are others, even not necessarily amongst the very elderly, but some whose lives have been cut a little bit short, can actually, in those final weeks or days, have an extraordinary full life in terms of what they feel, what's being said, the expressions of love, the memories, the assurances of being remembered. And there can be a time when life can come to an end in a way that is a good and a fitting end, given the fact that it will end for all of us. I mean, it's just silly to pretend it won't. So those times can be reassuring. And the other thing is, I've often said in circumstances, death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Now, if you're living with a horrendous illness and disease and pain and all kinds of things, and that that's impinging and afflicting all your family, the people that are caring for you, you might feel very, very upset about all the upset you're causing to others around you, as well as your personal pain and journey. Death is not the worst thing that can happen. And sometimes people will openly say, I want to go. And they don't like to say that to their family, but they might say it to you and me as ministers. And sometimes they will, and sometimes the family feel guilty, even about hoping or praying that this special loved person will die. Please let my mother die, kind of feeling, is a terribly conflicting and guilt-ridden thing to say, unless you're totally at ease with the fact that that is the best and the most loving outcome. Because sometimes it is.
The just a little bit on that is about being strong for families a little bit. The social worker that dealt with us when my mom was dying said that in her experience, over 80% of people will not die with their family in the room. They'll wait for them to go for a walk, like and they'll cut it there, because for them, they're being strong, and then they know that it's time to let go.
Yes, I mean, the percentage is obviously just a guess, but you think there is that dynamic, that thing does happen, and quite often it's a loving family can say to that person, "It's okay, you can go now. You don't need to keep fighting." We're okay with that. Which is,
and also, I also think the other day I spoke a little bit about ascension as Jesus' almost second death, because the disciples left that experience with Jesus not coming back in that moment. They had to learn to live without Jesus. And I think what was happening in that moment is Jesus was teaching their final lesson, is that you need to learn to do things without me. And a good teacher knows when to get out the car. When you're learning how to drive, there comes a point when the instructor has to get out the car and the student has to drive that car by himself, or pilot. There comes a point when the instructor gets out the plane and the pilot has to fly that thing, and if they crash it, they crash it. There's no. But a good teacher knows when to let the student go, and I think death is in some ways a gift, the final gift of teaching that a person gives. It's when that person leaves, they offer those left behind an opportunity to examine themselves and do things for themselves. When my mom died, I was devastated, and I still am devastated about it. But her death, she's now teaching me through leaving me and not picking up the pieces of my life when it falls apart, how strong I am, how resilient I am. She's teaching me stuff, about life, and I could only have learned that lesson if she was not here.
I mean, there's no question. A lot of lessons can only be learned through struggle and difficulty, and deepening of character and finding your own strength. These are all, it's truisms, isn't it? I don't know about the title of the song, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That was the Kelly Clarkson song not that long ago. Picking up on an old saying. It wasn't the original, but I have to say it's a bit simplistic. It's more complicated than that, because sometimes people, our lives are deeply blighted and changed irrevocably because of suffering or loss. We're all tied into one another, and we have that need to love and to be loved, and the cost of that when it's severed is going to be hurtful.
I think the second part of that question for me speaks underlyingly about privilege, and you touched on it a little bit about privilege. Is we live in a society that has good medical care, that we have the finances to look after ourselves, we have good food, we have all of the good things, and so we are extremely privileged. But in a country, where people live in a huge poverty, that are struggling to feed themselves, I think the hope of the afterlife can be
absolutely. I mean, you think of the slaves, all this racial tension at the moment in the States obviously goes back to slavery, and the Negro spirituals and all the mix up of biblical teaching and other beliefs that they had. But there was a hope for a future life, but and that helped to keep them going. But also, I mean, the idea of crossing over Jordan and these kind of spirituals was often not really meant to be for the afterlife. It was meant to be the Ohio River when they got to the north. So there was a double meaning there. It maybe sounded as though it was hyper spiritual, but it actually was rooted in reality too. They wanted a better earthly life. And why would Jesus have said all the things he said about how we treat each other and how we should live if it didn't matter? Of course it matters. That's, as you say, kingdom come on earth, and Jesus' message was the kingdom of God is here. The kingdom of God is amongst you. You know, he wasn't saying, don't you worry, it doesn't matter how bad things are now, you'll get your reward in heaven. So don't worry about the injustices and the poverty and the illness and the cruelty. It doesn't matter. We don't do anything about that because you'll get your just reward. That's a dreadful thing to say to the world.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to this thing that we spoke about earlier about that it's about how we live today, that that it reverberates, and that's really for me how life is about that reverberating for the rest of eternity. If we live good lives and people experience the goodness around us, I think that reverberates for eternity. It's like dropping a stone into a puddle; it just goes out, and I think that lasts forever. And so, heaven does come to earth in those moments.
I think it's about what we are here now, I have to say, and continuing. But, it should be something that's within us rather than something we're waiting to experience in the future.
Okay.
And it may be both.
Yeah. So I realize we've been speaking for half an hour. That's gone quickly.
What?
Can you believe it? Yeah. It's gone exceptionally quickly, and I don't want to take too much more time. So, Ken, is there anything more you want to add to the subject, or anything else you want to take up on it?
I think it's important that we all learn. I mean, people are saying this, that we all learn something from the present epidemic and lockdown and all the rest of it. And it's a lesson on how to be better human beings.
Yeah.
And that our humanity and indeed our enjoyment of life does not depend on, the crazy world of production, consumption, experience and travel. I mean, I think these are all good and exciting things, but essentially, we are asking the question, who am I? And what is worthwhile? What is important for all of us? I think people around the planet are asking that question.
Yeah, and I think for me, what I take from this and from that question is the idea that what we do now really does matter. We're not living for the afterlife. We're living for today, and that brings hope. That brings joy. I don't want to live for tomorrow. I want to live for today. And if Corona has taught me anything, it's that we took for granted so much. We took for granted the fact that we could hug somebody. We took for granted that we could sing in the same building, whether it be at a concert or in a church. We took a lot of things for granted. And I hope at the end of this, we will just stop and just see the beauty that's around in everyday moments. The heaven is
sorry, Justin. Go on, finish.
Sorry, that heaven is invading earth all the time.
Yeah. I think it may also have given us a little bit of an introduction to life as it will have to be in a sustainable planet. We're having to say, I think we can live by consuming less, by traveling less, by being more responsible, all of that. It will be different, and it may be a reduction of some of the things that we expect to have. Mm-hmm. But in the long term, we can do it. Life can and will be good, and in fact, maybe better in some ways. Mm-hmm. But this whole pandemic has pushed climate change off the agenda. And it has certainly not gone away. We all say that. We know that. Nobody thinks otherwise. Yeah. But how we get that back to the top of the agenda once the COVID thing is less pressing, I think is crucial. And we need to respect and look for changes.
Definitely. Great. Well, thank you for giving of your time, Ken.
My pleasure. Thank you for sharing the time with me.
Oh, it's been lovely. And friends, as always, if you would like to ask a question, you just email jtaylor, that's Taylor, so jtaylor at churchofscotland.org.uk, and just check it out. And we love the questions. No question is off limits. We'll discuss it. We might even squirm with you at some of the questions. But to be honest, these questions offer hope and offer guidance. And I think questions bring things alive. So the more questions we ask, the better. So
if I could interject, Justin, one of my little aphorisms always is, I'm much happier amongst people who are asking interesting questions than I am amongst people who think they know all the answers.
I agree. Fantastic. So thank you very much. And Ken and everyone, we'll see you next week, or in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks' time, where we will discuss some more questions. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.